That's the key thing, is the French want to know that you are going to do something in France for potential French clients. Welcome back to the Americans in Paris. I'm Stephen Heiner, and today I'm going to be discussing the Profession Libérale visa, which is the visa I've had for the majority of my stay in France. Right off the bat, I'm going to say it is not a work visa. It is not an entrepreneur visa. It is a freelancer visa. And what do I mean by that? Well, easily enough, a work visa would mean that I'd be able to work as an employee in the country. If you look at any work visa around the world, that's what a work visa permits you to do. This visa explicitly does not allow you to do that. You cannot get this visa and then take a job with a French company. The visa doesn't work. In fact, you'll lose the visa that you have. I'd say it's also not an entrepreneur visa because I'm not familiar with entrepreneur visas in the rest of the world in which you have an income cap. And there is an income cap here close to 86, 92,000 euros per year. The number can change periodically with legislation. I'll put a link to in the description of this video to my article on this visa, as well as my course on how to get this visa. That'll give you more details, but just broad strokes. Generally speaking, entrepreneur visas do not put limits on what you can earn. This visa does have a limit. Now, you could have been a business owner before. So potentially, let's say you had a graphic design business in the United States and you want to start a graphic design firm in France. That's fine. That's the key thing, is the French want to know that you are going to do something in France for potential French clients. Not that you have a graphic design business in the United States and you would like to port that over. That's not what the French want to hear. They want to know that you're going to be able to help the French and that your business has some relevance to them. So to put that in relation to what I did, I had and still have a US company that does content creation for small businesses. Their email newsletters, blogs, podcast production, etc. And I bill US clients for that. And what I did for my French Profession Libérale application was say I could do this for French startups who want English-speaking content, because I couldn't create content in French, probably still can't. My French level of literature is more along the lines of Tintin and Madeleine, not Proust and Balzac. So I'm not going to be able to write at the level I can in French as I can in English, but that's fine because there are French companies that want English content created, and that's the pitch that I made to the French government, and they accepted it. It's important to note too that you're not locked into that. So going back to the graphic design example, I tell the French I want to do graphic design for French companies, and when I come, I'm also then asked to help with a podcast production. That's okay, as long as the billing happens for the freelancer visa that you have, that's fine. The French aren't going to audit and say, well, you said you were going to be a graphic designer. You can only take work in graphic design. That's not true. You can take work in anything in which you can contract. The French, keep in mind, their main happiness is you are now a tax-paying part of their society. And that's something you should know right off the top. As someone who comes from a very privileged US taxation background, I think of it now that way because it's so much better than the French system, where you take 22% of your top line revenue and that goes straight into social charges. And the equivalent for Americans, this would be like your FICA, your Social Security. So going to Social Security and Medicare, that money is nowhere near 22% of your US paycheck, or even your self-employment tax if you're a business owner. So that money goes to the French government just for their social charges. So when people tell you there's free healthcare in France or there's free college, remind them that there's a 20% tax top line on your revenue that covers things like that. So it's not free. There's no free healthcare, there's no free lunch. This is a classic failure of economics that people don't realize. So that aside, you also still have to pay taxes for that business, and then you have to pay personal taxes in France. So there's 3 ways of taxation there. And so this relates to something that I've made the case for before, that I'm going through now in my citizenship process. You can potentially get a citizenship from this visa if you maintain your 5-year residence during this time and you are making a certain amount of income, particularly in the final 2 years before you submit your citizenship application, of at least 3 times what is called the SMIC, S-M-I-C, which is the French minimum wage, which at the time of recording this video is around 16,000 euros a year. Now, what I mean by that is it's not enough just to have that top line revenue. There needs to be some profitability. So for example, let's say 15,000 for, even though it's higher, just for ease of numbers and say, I'm making that 1,500 euros, 1,600 euros a month. I'm doing that in a given year. And I multiply that by 3 in my example, but most of that is cost. And so I'm not actually taking home that much. What worries the French is that you look economically fragile to them. And so someone I know, one of my former clients for the website, who went through this whole process, did the Profession Libérale, in his final 2 years of his Profession Libérale regime, I think he did 65 and 70K in top line revenue. So he was above that line of economically stable for the French. On the other side of this, and I certainly did this in my earlier years of the Profession Libérale visa, are people who are skimming along at the SMIC level and making the minimum required to renew the visa, because in your first year, you need to be viable to the French. And after that first year, you have an opportunity to renew for a 4-year card, but you only get that opportunity if your business looks viable in that first year. And if you're making at least the minimum, that's enough for the French. So if you think about the SMIC and you're making the SMIC, or I'd say to be safe, 20% above the SMIC, you're gonna be okay. Now, what's necessary to renew a visa is an entirely different line than what's necessary to get a 10-year card or citizenship. So 10-year card, definitely a higher, let's say, line than is necessary to renew your visa, and then citizenship even higher above that. And as I say, the French's concern of you being economically fragile in their mind is that the minute you get French citizenship, you're going to go on benefits and never work again. And I consider this to be a somewhat valid fear. I think it obviously has to be contextualized. Not all immigrants think or act this way, but I understand the French state's fear. But it's important to note that if you're used to, as I have been and am, used to the tremendous tax benefits you have in the United States of a corporation, whether you have an LLC, S Corp, however you have constructed your tax life as an American, for example, I have an S Corp, and that money, there's a number of deductions that happen before a certain amount then flows through to my personal. And so I'm not taxed twice. I'm not taxed for a company and taxed as a person. I'm simply taxed as a person. And I have a ton of deductions that exist in the United States that do not exist in France. So what that means effectively, if you're using the Proflib visa as a pathway to citizenship, that you are going to pay for that every year. And you might say, well, Stephen, I use the healthcare system. I'm going to get a college degree. So, that tax money that I'm paying, it's actually going right back into my pocket. You could think of it that way. But the important thing you have to realize is you're going to be paying for this citizenship. And do the math, however much it is. Okay, Stephen, it's $5,000 a year, it's $10,000 a year. And if I do that for 10 years and it ends up being 50 or 60 grand, that's worth it to me. And I would say if you have a Class B, Class C passport, something where you only have 40 or 50 countries that you can enter visa free, I understand that. A French passport is a major upgrade, and an EU passport is one of the most powerful passports in the world because you can live and work in 26 different countries, 27 different countries. However, if you already have a Class A passport, let's say like an American passport, where you have not that far off number of visa free from a Swiss passport, an EU passport, etc., then it's not that much of an upgrade in terms of where you can travel. That is a different question entirely, citizenship versus residency. I'm simply trying to address the question of, Stephen, you went through this process in order to be eligible for citizenship. How does that work? And the key part of this, maintaining your Profession Libérale visa, not just renewing it successfully, but you're going to have to make a certain income level. And if you don't make that income level, you are going to be denied for citizenship, no matter how long you live in France. And we'll talk about that in a future video. The next video in this series, I'm going to talk about that distinction between citizenship and residency, and why to get a citizenship in the first place, or are you perfectly happy with residency? There's no correct answer to this question, but I'm hoping to give you more context for that in our next video. Until next time, à bientôt.